Sorry, everybody. We're going to be starting in a couple of minutes. Sorry for the delay.
Six, 7, 8, 9, 10. Click back to 11. All right. Unmute. Hello, I'm here. Okay. All right.
Thank you, Tara. We're just giving folks a couple more minutes to join us.
Oh,
Okay?
no problem. I thought I was late. Trust me, I thought I was late. Okay. All right. I'm here. I'm just about to get settled. All right.
Good evening, everybody. I'm Virginia. I'm with Caraya LLC Consulting Co. and I'm representing the Black response for tonight. Stephanie got caught up in something that she's finishing up and then she will join us. For right now, we're just letting some folks come in. As they come in, if you would like to write your name and pronouns on the chat, and then we will be starting in just one more minute. Thank you so much. Thank you, everybody. Well, let's start. First of all, thank you for joining this important conversation. What about the dangerous few? We've brought a panelist of folks that are each of them will talk to you about what they do and how their work relates to the subject. But before we start with our conversation, we have Stephanie arrived. Hi, Steph. I was trying to impersonate you. I'm just joking. We'll let everybody sort of settle. And before we start, I wanted to just show you a little video presentation of what is the Black response and why we're doing these workshops. So I'm gonna share my screen and let you guys hear this. Perfect.
Welcome to the Black Responses bi-weekly community workshops and skill shares. These workshops will center marginalized community members to build our knowledge of abolitionist principles, practices, and non-carceral safety response strategies. We're building community capacity for collective care, mutual aid, and creating safe spaces that can grow public support for defunding the police and funding community safety alternatives. But you might be wondering, what is TBR?
The Black Response is an abolitionist research and advocacy organization that envisions and works towards building a world free of carceral and harmful responses. We seek to uplift the Black, brown, and otherwise marginalized communities in Cambridge and everywhere by working to unbundle and abolish policing, defund the police to invest in communities, and support the building of alternatives to public safety and the development of community care initiatives. We operate as a type of nonprofit membership cooperative whereby TBR members, the core governance committee, make decisions about and for the programs and operations of the organization.
You might be wondering what abolition is. Abolition is the practice of dismantling and removing a system. When we say abolition, we seek to abolish the prison industrial complex. Prison industrial complex abolition is a political vision with the goal of eliminating imprisonment, policing, and surveillance, and creating lasting alternatives to punishment and imprisonment. The Black Response is an abolitionist organization. We operate with transformative justice principles.
Meanwhile, traditional justice models, like carceral systems, hand the problem over to the state and state experts, thinking of lawyers, judges, police, principals. Whereas carceral systems ask what law or rule has been broken, who broke it, and what is the punishment, a system of transformative justice might ask what harm has been done, who has been harmed, who is responsible for the repair, what needs to happen to repair the harm and prevent future cycles of harm from continuing.
Are you interested in learning more about transformative justice, prison industrial complex abolition, or just want to keep in touch? Go to our website, theblackresponcecambridge.com, and sign up for our quarterly newsletters.
Perfect. Thank you for watching. I'll now pass it on to Stephanie to continue the conversation. Thank you.
Thank you, Virginia. Welcome, everyone. This is the second panel in our series on what is abolition, held by TBR. And I'm really excited to have this conversation with you all today. The first conversation was more about what can there be beyond policing? But the second question that we usually get asked outside of why not the police is, but what about the really terrible people? What about the people who are murderers and rapists and the like? And how does an abolitionist vision of the world address the very real concerns of people who commit those really terrible harms? And so we wanted to have a conversation around that, and we're really excited to invite some speakers here today to speak to some of the questions around what has been termed the terrible few. So I want to invite John Moore, Nikki Grant, and Tyrone McKinney to turn on their cameras and welcome them. Just have the group welcome them to the space. So just give you a chance to do that. Hi, John. Hey, Nikki. We can't see you, Tyrone. But are you here? Yay! You're on mute.
How about now?
Yay, great. All right. Okay. So I just thought maybe we could just go around and each of you introduce yourselves and talk a little bit about the work that you're doing. Is that okay?
Yes.
All right. Great. Tyrone, since your mic's already on, do you want to go ahead and introduce yourself?
I will. My name is Tyrone McKinney. Some call me Tia. You are welcome to address me in either or. And my pronouns are he, hey. And I work at Project Weber Renew. I am an HIV prevention specialist. I also work at the Department of Veterans Affairs, working with veterans as well. I'm an advocate in our community. I'm a peer recovery specialist, a community care health worker, and a HIV Hep C tester. There's probably a couple of other positions that I do that I didn't name, but I want to keep it cute. So yeah.
Thank you,
And
Tyrone.
okay, yep.
All right, I'll pass it to Nikki. Nikki, is that okay? Do you want to introduce yourself?
Sure. Hello, everyone. I'm Nikki. I use she, her pronouns. I am based in Philadelphia. I'm with Amistad Law Project. At Amistad, we're working to end mass incarceration in Pennsylvania. The work that I do, so I mainly my days are spent on a campaign to expand non-police mental health crisis responders in Philadelphia. We have a campaign to increase funding for that program here in Philly and to change the way that that program runs so that folks in Philly, instead of having the police come when they're in crisis, have an actual caring mental health professional respond to that crisis. Throughout our history at Amistad, we've worked with people in prison who are serving death by incarceration sentences or life sentences. And yeah, we've been working to get people home from prison. So that's me.
Thank you, Nikki. John, do you want to introduce yourself?
Pranam Da, good afternoon. My name is John Moore. I'm a writer and organizer from Cymru, which you probably know as Wales. My involvement with the criminal justice or criminal injustice system, should I say, started in the 1980s when I began working for an ex-prisoner housing project in London, England, which had been set up by PROP, the prisoners, British Prisoners Organisation. So it was a self-help, prisoner-led organisation. For the next 25 years, I worked in not-for-profit housing, predominantly with people leaving prison, but also some street homelessness services. Burnt out, I decided to do a master's in criminology when I discovered that all the wisdom I'd learned from people who had experienced the state's carceral system was of no value to the discipline of criminology, which spoke an entirely different language. And I kind of responded by beginning to to try and resurrect the abolitionist groups, which in Britain were in a point of flux, and we set up a group called No More Prison. And subsequent to that, I organized with the Reclaim Justice Network, and currently I'm organizing with Abolitionist Futures, who run a series of sort of educational programs around reading groups, and also produce. I write quite a lot for them, and I suspect it's my 2016 paper, "What About the Rapists? An Abolitionist Response," that got me my invite today. Serendipity, or more accurately, the algorithms of social media, has spread this small article to a wide readership, and I'm always really glad to be able to engage in these debates. Just to say one final thing, one of the things I'm particularly interested in, and it's really funny when with Abolitionist Futures we organised the thing, and all these young people in Britain think that abolitionism was invented 10 years ago in the United States. And one of the things I'm quite keen to do is to bring that wider global history of abolitionist organizing, which goes back really for well over 100 years, and the different perspectives of particularly European abolitionists into the kind of wider debates about abolition praxis.
Well, thank you all. We got a little bit of an introduction to you all. And actually, John, you're absolutely right. That is how I came across you. I'll be sure to share that article with everyone. So when we invited you all to come speak, we shared a prompt with you all. I've sort of tweaked that after hearing from Nikki. So I'm gonna have Nikki go first. But I wanted to share the prompt with everyone. But basically it is what does the current justice system get wrong about? And I've changed it a little bit to people who murder, rape, and commit violence. So I'm gonna give it over to Nikki.
All right, hello again, and thank you for having me. I think I wanted to start with like my own context for how I come to this conversation. So I've never been incarcerated. No one in my family has ever been involved in the criminal legal system, and I've only ever like been to prison as a visitor and to court as a lawyer or observer. I am, however, very familiar with violence. And yes, in all the ways that we usually think about a survivor of harm, but also in the ways that we don't generally talk about, which is the violence that the system perpetuates. So I am the descendant of a people who were violently enslaved on this continent. My parents were born on an island that was violently colonized. I grew up in a neighborhood where once Black people started to move in, white people started to move out, and they sucked all the resources out of the community as they left. I currently live in a neighborhood where people who look like me are being forced out of their homes because they can't afford to live there. And you can see in real time the divestment from longtime community members to make things more comfortable for gentrifiers. This too is violence. If we're going to talk about the dangerous few, we have to begin at the beginning by speaking about the dangerous systems that create and foster the conditions for individuals to make the choice to harm other individuals. In my view, those overarching systems are white supremacy, capitalism, patriarchy, and colonialism. Those systems rely on violence on the many by the few to maintain power. So yes, we're here to talk about like the scary people who do abhorrent things, but scary people aren't created in a vacuum. They don't spring out of nowhere. When we talk about sexual violence, for example, you can't divorce that from rape culture, from the patriarchal system that says that women and gender expansive people's bodies don't belong to them. When we talk about murder, you can't separate that from the centuries of history that has deemed non-white bodies as inherently less valuable, as disposable, except for labor for the ruling class. Violence at any scale is dehumanizing, and when it happens, whether at a systemic level or between individuals, it is happening because life is not being treated as precious. And I can't talk about violence by the dangerous few without talking about the genocides happening in Gaza and Sudan. It's a horrifying example of what I'm talking about. There are both individuals and state actors perpetuating unspeakable atrocities on human beings. And it's because of those dehumanizing systems of colonialism and apartheid that this is able to persist. So speaking of dehumanization, as I answer this question, let's talk about language. At Amistad Law Project, I work very closely with people who you might call murderer or rapist or criminal. But the people I've worked with has taught me, and my first response to this question is a quote from Bryan Stevenson, that people are more than the worst thing that they've ever done. Everyone has a story. People are complex, multidimensional beings. There's a whole human being and a story in the years before whatever harm took place. And there's a whole human being and story in the years and decades after. There are people that I care very deeply about for whom taking another person's life is a central, devastating part of their story. But they're also parents, or artists, or writers, or mentors, or legislators, or professors, or restorative justice practitioners, or executive directors. The label of murderer or rapist or criminal follows people around for life, and I personally don't participate in continuing that label, label people in that way. At Amistad and many of the movement places that I participate in, we intentionally use person-first language to remind ourselves that people, even people who've done serious harm, are still human beings. That leads me to my second response, which is that people who do horrible things have the capacity to change. When given the opportunity and the tools, people do grow. We know that people age out of crime. Several years ago, in preparation of a friend, his resentencing for a homicide that he committed when he was 17 years old, we decided to do this event that would show how he's a member of his community. And as we were planning that event, we got to reflect on all the things that he had been a part of and created during his 30 plus years of incarceration, whether it was co-founding organizations or editing a quarterly magazine. And a lot of his work has been directly responsible for like the shifts that the Pennsylvania Department of Corrections had to make of their still tortuous practice of solitary confinement. Something that he said that will always stick with me was that he entered prison a child who was out of control, but today he's a man who knows himself and knows what he's capable of. And we called that event People Change the World, because that encapsulated this sentiment. He's home today and he is still changing the world. And he's being a huge positive influence and force in our community. So like I'm gonna close out, but I wanted to also say, like, I grew up in a faith tradition that claims that human beings are created in the image of God, and that the Creator thought our lives were so precious that he sacrificed their son to redeem us. So my faith also compels me to believe that every life is precious, and that everyone is worth fighting for, and we can't dispose anybody, just throw people away. So I'll just close there. Thank you.
Wow, I mean, that was a very strong start to the discussion, so thank you so much, Nikki. A lot of food for thought there. John, do you want to hop into this conversation? What does the current justice system get wrong about people who have murdered or have committed rape or committed violence?
Was that my prompt? Can you hear me?
Sorry, that is the problem. Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. Sorry. I thought I'd got lost somewhere over the Atlantic. Yeah, I think that question. What about the dangerous few or the rapists is one that we always get thrown at us when we critique the criminal injustice system. And I think it's really important, and certainly when I was writing that piece, What About the Rapist, it was really important that I started off by detailing the reality that we do have a global epidemic of sexual violence. It's by taking these positions, we're not minimizing the problem. The statistics globally show that sexual violence is not is structural and is consistent across the globe. And in terms of the criminal injustice system, what does it get wrong? In terms of statistics, its failure is really clear. In England and Wales, when I calculated the figures, 99% of rapes and other sexual violence escaped any sanction from the criminal justice system. And that's not surprising because the criminal justice system focus is always on the possible individual deviance of the alleged perpetrator and willfully ignores the wider social context and associated power relations. If you follow sexual violence trials, you realize that sort of patriarchy, misogyny, masculinity, heteronormativity are never in the dock, and they only appear occasionally, but then as alibis for the defense. The person who's experienced the sexual violence ends up having to experience their version of the truth being disputed, challenged, tested, and potentially discredited. It's their behavior, character, and integrity which ends up being put on trial. They have to relive and re-experience the violent victimization, their violent victimization to satisfy the demands of so-called justice. But I think one of the things that's quite important to do, and one of the things I try and do in my work is in trying to understand the criminal justice system is not to just dismiss it simply as failure. Of course, it fails the vast majority of people, but in important senses, it's a remarkable success story. The myth that criminal justice is an effective response to sexual violence is crucial for the legitimization of the prison. In responding to abolitionist proposals to abolish the prison or the wider penal system, critics immediately ask, what about the rapist? And implicit in their question, and I think we need to challenge that question, is the assumption that criminal justice provides safety, that it operates as an effective protection from sexual violence. It's actually beyond irony that despite all the evidence of criminal justice failures, in practice, it manages to sustain its continued existence, and indeed its continued failure, by maintaining the myth that it actually protects. When I started writing the paper, the original title was What About the Murderers and Rapists? And I decided to do it as two papers, and I must write that follow-up on killers. And I use the phrase killers because murder is such a narrow term, and it's a legal construct, and it's been carefully constructed as much to allow certain killers to escape its definition as to embrace others who kill. Even if we can see it daily, the genocide which is going on in Palestine. But even if we look more locally and reflect on our own lives and ask ourselves the question, are we likely to live our full life term? The reality is, statistically, most of us will die prematurely from entirely avoidable factors. Being murdered, in reality, is one of the least of our concerns. Racism, pollution, unaffordable healthcare, and hundreds of other factors are far more threatening to our lives. In my not-for-profit work, I met in excess of over 100 people convicted of murder. In so many of their stories, it was clear that these were not different from us. These were not born killers. What had happened in their lives had a context. And often when you looked at that context, it showed clear links between their individual act of violence and the structural factors that are actually the cause of the overwhelming majority of premature deaths. The focus on murder distracts us from the things which are actually far more likely to kill us. Again, we need to be aware that the question of what we do with the murderers is designed to both legitimize prisons and distract us from the dangers we face. When I noticed sometime last year that What About the Rapist was circulating on social media, I was interested in the responses to it. A couple of people on Twitter had actually, of its critics on Twitter, had actually bothered to read the article, but they were concerned with the lack of a specific response that would deal with sexual violence. We're trained to believe in the magic bullet. Indeed, criminal justice claims to be one. However, most people who have experienced violence, particularly sexual violence, and engaged with the police and courts would see it is at best a blank and at worst a bullet that explodes in the gun. Abolitionist approaches never claim to be magic bullets. In my paper, I talk about how for abolitionists, our focus and priority is on the person who's experienced sexual violence. By focusing on them, a whole range of options that criminal justice closes down open up. But I stress there was no standard prescription, but it allows us to think about more structural solutions. My brief today was to talk about what does the criminal justice system get wrong about murderers, rapists, and violent criminals. I've not got the time to list even 1% of these. So let me talk instead about what it gets right, or more precisely, in what way it is a success. The criminal justice system is brilliant in shaping common sense perceptions of who and what we see as dangerous, and persuading us that only the police, courts, and prisons can keep us safe. When people ask, what do we do with the dangerous? It is the state, not the community, who decides who is dangerous. And the state has a very narrow definition of dangerousness. If we look at those behaviors that cause us the most harms, that represent the biggest dangers we face in everyday life, it is poverty, structural racism, pollution, etc. But these are ignored by the state and the criminal justice system, who instead try to tell us the real danger is contained in their prisons and confronted on the streets by their police. But let's not forget that these are the same police and prisons who focus disproportionately on the poor, the racialized, the marginalized, those who are most vulnerable to the real harms. If we genuinely want a less harmful and less dangerous world, a world where premature death and sexual violence is minimized, we need to look towards social justice rather than criminal justice. As Angela Davis has advised, we cannot be moderate. Ultimately, we need revolutionary change to a whole social structure, a post-colonial, post-capitalist world. But such a world needs building from the bottom up, and it is through community organization, such as the Black Response. By the way, I loved your website and the work you're doing, putting in place the foundation stones of alternative ways of responding to harms in the community and allowing us to see there are better ways of living. Thank you for inviting me to participate, and solidarity with your organizing.
Thank you so much, John. Oh my gosh, I'm appreciating this. I'm hearing a lot of really great things. I'm excited to dig into further. Right, Tyrone. Ooh, have we lost you? Okay, there you are. You're on mute again, Tyrone. I invite you to unmute and share your thoughts on what the current system gets wrong.
Okay, so thank you for just allowing me to speak and about my truth. I can give perspective, certainly can't articulate it the way the first two speakers were. I got a lot out of them. But I'm on the other side of the fence because I was one of those people that were locked up, not a rapist, not a murderer, but I was an attempted murderer and I paid my price for it. I absolutely do think that the system is absolutely flawed. I think it's designed to warehouse people. Prison reform is a joke. And I've been amongst all the difficulties of trying to reintegrate myself back into society, but the system failed myself and a lot of people that were part of it. I also feel that what the system gets wrong with the way they deal with rapists and murderers, I don't think that they put people in the places that they need to be in. I think they filter them in areas where they shouldn't be. And they fail them as well. Not saying that they deserve to be in the same space with people that commit misdemeanors or whatever. But I just think that prison reform is never reform because you have a lot of recidivism going on. Once the justice system warehouses you, because that's what it is, because prison institutions, I think, are warehouses. But once they do warehouse you, they throw the key away. They just leave you there. They don't reform you. They don't treat you the way human beings should be treated. This I know because I experienced a lot of things in the prison system that I shouldn't have. And I feel that it starts at the door of the justice system, because when you get locked up by a policeman, then a policeman can say anything that he knows is going to allow you to be locked up. And so that doesn't give you a fighting chance, because the person that's the defense attorney versus the person that is prosecuting you versus the judge, they all break bread together. So you don't have a chance. They're sitting there just, they play Russian roulette with people's lives. And I think that it needs to be a more intense hearings going on in the courts, meaning if I have a charge and they don't know what to do with me, well, they're in the back room making deals. I want to be in the back room too, making right along with them. We don't get to see that part, and that's unfair. We see it on TV, and that's a good idea for us to at least implement that in our system. And I think that, because I want to know how they speak about me behind closed doors. I want to have a seat at the table, so to speak, while they're thinking about what should they do with my life. And so I think that's very unfair for them to play Russian roulette with my life. Excuse me, we're closed.
Okay, all right.
Okay. And I don't think that excuse me, everybody, I'm sorry. I don't think that they should play Russian roulette with people's lives. And that starts at the door of the system. Once they deal with you, then it's like you have no hope, because they don't bring good news to you when they're throwing the key away. No matter who you are, whether you're a murderer or a shoplifter. And so I think that the system is designed to fail you from the beginning, because from my experience over 30 plus years being part of that system, not once have they did anything that made me think that, there's hope when I do get out, because I always got out with nothing. They starting at the door, making deals with my life, and it's designed to make you take a deal. That's not how your system's supposed to work. Your system's not supposed to be designed on monopoly. And so I just feel that, the way the system is, it's totally imbalanced. It's not even balanced. Then you got lawyers and prosecutors making bets over how many cases they won, and versus this one versus that one. It's a whole monopolized system that doesn't work for the people that are supposed to be getting some type of fair justice. There's a lot that I still don't know, and I've been out for a little bit, but the more I read and the more I watch on TV, I just don't think that it's getting any better. There's a lot of areas in society where crimes start and they end up just, everybody else outside of those crimes ends up playing a part, whether it's people in the community, whether it's an innocent bystander, whether it's people that cross the border illegally and commit crimes, or whether it's a person that goes in the supermarket and just shoots up everybody because of the color of their skin. So a lot of people, innocent people, are affected by certain people's behavior. But then there's the justice system. They play a part in how the people that committed these crimes are going to be treated. And so once that person goes into the realm of incarceration or the justice system, because that's where it starts, then you kind of wonder, what's going to happen to this guy? Is he going to suffer like my family members suffer? Or is he going to get out in 10 years or 20 years? And so, the design is to warehouse, but it starts at the door. And I just think that the system is imbalanced in it, and it's a failure. It's absolutely a failure. So now society, and I'm part of it, we settle for whatever the makeup of the justice system is. We've been conditioned to take what they give us. Fighting back becomes exhausting. And I just think that reform needs to be painted differently than the way it has been for all these years. I know that in Rhode Island, I believe we are the last state that allows a person to take a deal, and then after you do the suspended sentence that you already have, you still have the charge pending. In most other states, that doesn't happen. And so, that just goes to show that the system is about numbers. And that goes back to what I was saying about warehousing people. It's
Tyra,
uncomfortable. Yeah.
sorry, I'm just gonna pause there. That was a lot of really, really insightful stuff, and I think you
Okay,
were
yeah.
brilliant.
I didn't think I was saying enough. That's why I kept on trying to, go ahead. Yeah, that's
No,
fine.
you were brilliant. No, you were absolutely brilliant. I was writing down like so many great things. Thank you for that. I just want to open it up to other folks to ask any of the three speakers any questions. We're gonna do progressive stack, so you can either raise your virtual hand or write the word stack in the chat, and I'll call on folks. Yeah, and you'll be able to unmute. If you don't feel comfortable speaking, you can also just type your question in the chat and we'll work it out from there. Any questions so far? While we're waiting for questions.
I have a
Who is
question.
it?
Hi, this is Lily, and I'm sorry I'm off screen because I'm just in a place where the lighting is not great. But I do have a question. So I'm involved with the prison abolition group in Boston, Families for Justice is Healing, and I just moved and I reached out to my new state senator to urge him to support the prison construction moratorium bill that's in the state legislature right now. And he actually responded to my email, and we did a little back and forth, and now we're going to have coffee in a week and a half. And so I would love to hear from you. My perspective is, as yours is, that we need an entirely different system that starts from an entirely different place, and a place of healing, that our resources should go to entirely different places. I'm wondering how you would frame that for basically a white male state senator who is completely bought into the current system. How would you start to shift that narrative for someone who, what he said to me was, I think we need to build more prisons. They just need to be more humane prisons. And I said, what are you even talking about? What is a humane prison? So I would love to hear any thoughts on how to speak to someone from that, who has that perspective. Thank you.
Great question. This is Anyone? Does that vibe with anyone? Oh, Tyrone, go ahead. Yeah.
Yeah, I would say that I think he probably needs to start counting how many of those crimes are serious crimes. Number one, how many of those crimes are mental health crimes? Because let me tell you something, all the drugs and stuff that's out there with the xylazine and the fentanyl and everything, those turn into mental health issues for sure. I work out here in the streets and I know for a fact that addiction, number one, those guys that are locked up for little small crimes and they're getting caught with drugs and everything, they need to be in rehabs. People that suffer from mental health illnesses, they need to be in a hospital. So that's not and what happens is society ends up warehousing them in prisons for those numbers. For it becomes a warehouse for numbers, for grants and for federal funding. And that's totally the wrong approach to continue to build prisons. You don't need to build prisons. If you want to build something, build more rehabs, build more mental situations for people to go into and get the kind of treatment. Build overdose prevention centers. We're getting ready to open up one. Project Weber, we're getting ready to open up one in August here in Rhode Island, the first in the country, because we believe in people and we want to meet them where they're at. We don't want to warehouse them because they have a mental health issue or an issue with drugs. We don't want to warehouse them because, and these guys are not committing the crimes that murderers and rapists and stuff like that. They just want to be themselves. And the way people, I don't totally agree with the formula that they use, but I'm in harm reduction, so I meet people where they're at. If they have a problem, how can I help you? I don't want to build a warehouse around a person that has a mental health issue. I don't want to build a warehouse around a person that suffers from substance abuse. And that's what the vast majority of crime is out here today.
Excellent points, Tyrone. Yes, and give people the resources they need, not put them in prisons, definitely. That's a very compelling argument there. John or Nikki, do you guys have anything to add to what Tyrone had to say?
I was hoping to duck this one. I'm not. It's really difficult because the danger is that you kind of get onto their terrain, and by trying to engage with them, you start off by conceding a lot of ground to try and find somewhere where you can have a conversation. So I think it's really about being strategic. Are they a conservative who can maybe be influenced by justice arguments about just the level of disproportionality and injustice? Are they a more liberal person who can be picked up on other arguments? But it is really a case for politicians that they control resources, and that's why the whole defund the police is such an engaging. I don't know if you can see my T-shirt. I'm not sure if that kind of gets across, but it kind of shows all the services, the libraries, the art centres, and everything else that are being removed, youth centres that are being removed from communities and replaced by sort of carceral solutions. So I think for me, it's about saying, do you really want to use your money locking people up? Because if you do that, you can't use your money for community services, be they drugs, things, or even just basic, certainly in our area here, all the youth services have been closed. So young people have no structured services available to them. So they go on the streets and become police property. They've got no one to advocate for them, and they're just set up to be sucked into the carceral machine. So yeah, good luck, I think is the main thing I'd say. Good luck.
I can jump in too. I think what we've used for more conservative and moderate politicians is the money argument. Prison is expensive. Building prisons is expensive. The more cost-effective way to deal with, if you have, an increasing population of people in prison is to decarcerate. And you can do that by looking at these extreme sentences, people who are aging, who've aged in prison, who you can safely, without any public safety issues, release from prison. And so that is the way to address the increasing population of people, not building more prisons.
Yeah, absolutely. There's this amazing article to get at the decarceration numbers that you brought up, Nikki. I'll drop it in the chat now. I'll be sure to include a PDF of it for folks who have trouble accessing these in the email that goes out after the event. But it's about the numbers. And so it would be really helpful to perhaps take a look at this, Lily. Maybe even print out a copy and take it over with you. So hopefully that helps. Any other questions from folks?
Hi, everybody.
Mark,
yeah. Thanks so much for this. I'm a convinced prison abolitionist, but when I talk about this with other folks, the thing that people often bring up are the Dylan Roofs of the world, the gentleman who did the mass murder of Black people in the church in Charleston, South Carolina. So in our future abolitionist world, how would we deal with people like him?
Yeah, excellent question. Check in with the panel. Does anyone want to? John?
Can I jump in?
Yeah.
I think we need to be clear what the criminal justice system does, and it's about identifying someone to blame and then inflicting pain on them, and so that's the way it operates. Now, is there a case for incarcerating some people, or at least having some restraint on them? And I think you're right, there are some people who objectively represent a serious harm, but they're very few and far between. And my solution is one that most people find outrageous. It is what I would call the Hilton prison. That if we as a society feel that we're unable to live with someone, then we have a duty to look after them. And so, maybe the first thing every day, the prison guard should apologize to the person for keeping them locked up. There's no reason why they shouldn't be able to have visits from their families, even having a partner sleep over. If what we're saying is that we need to be some people we just can't safely contain in our current communities, then that's not arguing for prison and locking them up and solitary confinement and all the pains of imprisonment. It's just saying, sorry, I'm really sorry, but actually we feel as a community that you are too dangerous, and so we're going to put some restrictions on you, but we're really sorry. We recognize that that's not a nice thing to do, and we're going to make sure it's comfortable. You've got a nice bed, that you have whatever you need to survive. So it's really taking the punitive out of it, and so maybe each country would need a few dozen units like that for people, but they really are extreme examples. We've also got to one of my mentors was a guy called Niels Christie, and he became an abolitionist by sitting in on the trials of Norwegian collaborators with the Nazis. And he realized that they were just ordinary people, and that actually post-Second World War, they were no longer dangerous. People knew who they were, knew what they'd done, and they may have been responsible for hundreds, thousands of deaths, but they were still human beings. And when we look at examples like the one you gave, absolutely horrific. But we're going to have people who are in both your country and my country who are providing the arms that are currently responsible for a genocide and are providing the political cover in the United Nations, that's on a much greater scale. And quite frankly, I would like to see those people become harmless. But that doesn't require locking them up. It just requires removing them from office and, making them live a life of shamed retirement rather than actually doing any other sanctions. I don't know if that's helpful, but it's about kind of separating out that sometimes there is a need for safety with the need to punish.
Was your hand up, Nikki?
I thought that Tara wanted to go, so I'll go ahead and Tyrone if.
Thank you for that. You're on mute, Tyrone.
I forgot where I was at with the thoughts gone. If I can think of it, coming back. Oh. Okay, I'm there. Okay. So pertaining to the gentleman, a situation like his, in the Charleston shooting and stuff, I really truly believe that is a mental health issue. I don't think in my heart that a 17-year-old, and I could be wrong, but I'm just going on, on my feeling about it. I just think there's an underlying issue. There's a little more. Probably that the system probably is finding out about him now if they're doing any therapy on him. But I still think because of his actions, he should be punished, but he should be seeking some type of reform in mental capacity, because his mental was at an incapacity. And there was people that suffered. And so the system, I don't know if they treated that right. I feel he probably should have been in an institution, maybe because of the crime and the way it was played out. Sometimes societies dealt that type of hand. And that enables them to do what's quick and what's fast, throw them right away. Because that kid's still got a little life in him if he ever gets out, because he was young when he went in. But there's certain situations that, you tend to look at a little more than you would the normal guy that you want to throw the key away with. Yeah. So. Yeah, that's that.
I don't have an answer to this question, right? It just makes me think though, like, we want people to be accountable for the things that they do, and our justice system doesn't actually allow for a real accountability for like serious harm, like racist violence, right? And so while I don't have the answers, I do know that again, people do change. I've known of people in prison who have mentored people who are straight up like KKK members who my friends have like mentored them and taught them how to read, and they've seen those people change. And so there's got to be a way to like actually have accountability for people who like perpetuate that kind of harm, and we've got to try to figure out a way to do it like humanely, but I don't have the answer.
Yeah, I feel like I should weigh in here too. I don't have the answer. And I think it's really disingenuous of anyone who's within the system to lie and say that they care about the well-being of the people who were harmed by a white supremacist who intended to inflict violence on a group of people. And I don't think Dylan Roof is the one individual who did one bad thing, because I don't think his act of violence is the issue at hand here. is that there's a country that's built on settler colonialism that indoctrinates people into violence and then creates systems that continue to indoctrinate people into violence, and then one day give them the tools to commit that horrific violence, and then says, okay, this one person did this bad thing and he is the axis of evil. That's not the case. I mean, he did that thing. We won't forget it, and the lives of anyone who's alive during that moment is forever impacted by that thing. But to say that he is an individual who committed violence and the system has dealt with that is complete BS, in my opinion, because there are hundreds of people plotting terrible things like this, and the system is not addressing the root causes of that. They know that there are people who intend to commit harm, and they're doing nothing about it. We know that these people have access to the weapons to commit their intended violence, and they're doing nothing about it. So at the core of the system that we have, they don't intend to stop the violence. They've never intended to prevent any violence from happening to people like myself. So I really find it really disingenuous to say that somehow the system is going to start to protect me because there are individuals that commit that violence. I can't get with that personally, but that's my opinion. That said, there are other thoughts in the chat. Amy wrote, I want to share a different view. Violence is not a symptom of mental health. It's a symptom of disconnection. And Lily wrote, given the extraordinary response to the church community, you could certainly envision a restorative justice approach accompanied by mental health supports. Yeah, it sounds like we're all sort of dreaming of responses to these things. So I really appreciate that. I also saw your hand up, John, so I want to give you a speech to share, space to share.
No, it's just really just you kind of made the point probably better than I did in a different way, but it just suddenly struck me that we need to accept that criminal justice is always after the event. You know, the question they're giving us is, what do we do after this terrible thing has happened? And there's no conceptualization of developing strategies to stop it happening. And you're absolutely right. You know, it's one of the big misconceptions people have is that, you know, racism is an individual trait. It's a personality defect. You know, individual people display racism, but the reason and what legitimizes and what gives it power is the institutional racism, which is built into, you know, we live in a different country, but there are remarkable similarities. You know, Britain was the great colonial power. Britain was, you know, Britain took Africans to what is now the United States. It was a British colony. It was Britain that introduced the institution of slavery. So, you know, those similarities and that wealth and that institutional racism, which continues to this very day, and it's very convenient for those that want to hide that institutional racism to blame individuals when actually it's a structural issue.
Any other questions? I'm gonna pull some of the stuff I've heard so far. John, you use this term that I'd never heard of before, and I'd like to hear more about it if you may. Use the term police property. I'm intrigued by the use of property there. Can you expand on that, please?
It's this idea that certain it's this idea that certain people are the police's property. That there are people they can do what they like with impunity. And essentially, it's predominantly young working class people and disproportionately people of color, and particularly black people, where the police, feel they have those people are their property, and that's legitimized by wider society, effectively endorsing it by facilitating it. So the police can do things to say, young black kid that they can't do to me, because that young black kid is perceived to be police property, when I have privilege, which will mean they'll back off if they're confronted by me. That's kind of where it came from. And it goes back to the very origins of British policing. They used to get in trouble in their first few years when they thought people were their properties, but it turned out that they were the servants of middle-class people. And so therefore they were told off for interfering with people's servants, which was that's the history of that.
I feel like I'm gonna have to check in with you again. I have lots more questions. I also wanted to ask Nikki a question. At our last in-person event, which was this debate, we were asking, can you work within the system, or do you have to work within the system? You go into prisons, you're in the courts, so you have to engage with the system. I want to know what's that as an experience, but also what does that do to your values and your abolitionist principles?
Yeah, it's a tough one. Yeah, I think that there are many of us for whom dealing with the system has made us abolitionists. That is certainly the case for me. Like I, grew up thinking, sure, there's injustices, but everything is, I learned after going to law school that this was not okay. So there I think there's like you throw a needle to like, and I also see Joshua's question in the chat too, which I think relates to that, like whether you can like do incremental changes or dramatic change. And it's a tough one. An example that I want to give is that of progressive prosecution, which is a thing that has been talked about in the US for the past a few years, where like in Philadelphia in particular, like we have DA Larry Krasner, who's like a progressive prosecutor, who's someone who like ran on the idea that you don't have to like the first choice doesn't have to be like locking people away, but there could be like the carceral approach to criminal justice. And I think those things are helpful for sure. And I'll even go further. There are people in my community that are home today because we have Larry Krasner in office. Like there are people who were sentenced to life in prison, who got resentenced during his tenure as DA, who were able to come home in our communities and are doing amazing things because of his viewpoints. But at the same time, he is the prosecutor and his job is to lock people in prison. That is literally his job. And so there's and I think Tyrone was saying it's a bit of harm reduction as an approach. So that is if you are choosing to work within the system, you're doing it from the idea of being a harm reductionist, because the system is rotten. You cannot fix it. I actually do believe that it needs to be just tossed. But because I'm living within the system, I'm living within the world that I'm living in today, I choose to like find the ways that I can to make interventions because I mean what I've seen so far, like with my progressive DA, is that I've gotten some people home and they're in the communities and they're making our communities better. So that's like the harm reduction approach is like how I see like working within the system. Um, but I am striving towards the day where we can just say goodbye to the system. That's where I'm at.
Yeah, thank you. And Tyrone, I mean,
Yeah.
being on the inside, were you exposed to people who had committed like acts of violence and people who are treated and are labeled the dangerous few? What do you think that does to the experience of being human, but also what do you think we should undo about that experience, if that makes sense?
Um, if there was a way that we could undo stigma, I think that would probably open doors for better dialogue between trusting where they put us. And I say that because sometimes when you go behind the walls, then you're already stereotyped. There's already a stigma amongst you and against you. And so you're fighting battles coming into the door. Now, when it comes to a person that has murdered someone or raped someone, sometimes they stick them right in the thick of things. So their life is in danger when they come into prison. And so you have to readjust the way you move in there because you want to get out. Or you're going to parlay your sentence. You're going to engage with drama, so to speak. And so their design is to disrupt, to add on, to integrate, to separate, to divide, and to conquer anything that moves amongst their system. And so you have two tiers of justice. You have the justice system on the outside, and you have the justice system on the inside. And so who wants to fight a battle preventing to get in jail? And then when you get in there, you're fighting a battle to get out. And so you have to fight both systems certain type of ways when you're amongst it. And it sucks because some guys that were murderers and rapists because I started in the late 70s when the mafia guys who were all friendly to me. I started way back then, and sometimes the way society is now and the way the system is built now, it was just we ran the prison system, and so it was totally different than the way it is now. The people that did those type of crimes that beheaded people and killed nuns and families, and there's a gentleman named Craig Price. Those type of crimes, heinous crimes, they weren't in the building in regular population where we were. They knew that prisoners that ran a prison, it was dangerous for a person that had a heinous crime to be in that same building. So they had a separate building at that time. That's when, the prison system was designed differently to house people for whatever reason. But the vast majority of inmates without the high murder crime type of heinous crime type of charges, they weren't in the same buildings with me. So I frequented with people that were murderers, but probably, defending themselves or their families or whatever. It was different types of movement, different types of ways with different types of people that dictated how we treated each other back then. I know it as being a gay man in jail. It was totally different. It was society wasn't acceptable to it, but in that society, it was acceptable. So I was safe. Yeah, so like it's just totally different now. The system inside the system has more control over how people move now. I think inmates are more safer now than they were years ago. So, the dynamics were different, the setup was different, and the people were different for whatever reason. But yeah, so yeah, it was doable when I was coming up in the prison, because that's where I was raised, in the prison system. Yeah. If that answered your question.
I'm thinking through a lot of that for sure.
Yeah.
I just want to check in with it. Other folks, does anyone else have any questions? It could be for any of the three speakers, but also just for the community. No, this is a shy crowd. All right. Well, on that note, should we move to final remarks from the speakers then? Nikki, do you want to start us off? Do you have any last words to share about the dangerous few?
I think I wanted to like reiterate that, our criminal legal system is reactive. It is not preventative. And I guess if we want to do anything to make our communities more safe, we have to go to the root. We have to dismantle the systems that keep people poor and under-resourced and insecure. You have to dismantle the systems that oppress women and queer folks. And I mean, that's the only way we're going to be able to prevent there from being murder and sexual harm. So that's where my last words there. Thank you for having me.
Thank you, Nikki. Tyrone? You're on mute.
Okay. Because I'm in harm reduction, I've learned that we as a society, whether it's the justice system, the criminal system, we need to give conversation more of a chance to conversate. Don't be afraid to give a person that's struggling or suffering from, whether it's a mental illness or whatever, don't be afraid to give them a chance to get it right.
It looks like Tyrone is frozen. While we wait for Tyrone to unfreeze, I just want to acknowledge Lee's. Oh,
Yeah, absolutely. And that's what we do here at Project Weber. We get the information out. So yeah, that's what we need
Tyrone,
more.
can you go back? We lost you for a little bit. I don't know what you said.
I was saying that we need to get more information information out, and don't be afraid to get that information out, because that's what we do here at Project Weber. We get the information out. We go out and outreach. We speak in the training schools and the prisons and stuff. We're doing that. We just want other people to model us, partner with us. We have doctors from Lifespan and other places, that Miriam Hospital, that go out into outreach, because the people in these homeless encampments, they're afraid, they're resistant to go into the emergency rooms because they're treated like shit. So we ask the nurses and the doctors, come out and see how they are before they get to you. And I encourage the directors of these prisons to come out here into these places where we pass out condoms and safe injection kits and pipes and stuff to these people that are suffering from, spreading diseases and stuff, but we're trying to, lessen their load, and come out here and see what it's like before they get into the criminal system that puts them into the prison system. So I encourage that.
Yeah, I really appreciate that, Tyrone. Before I go to you, John, I just want to acknowledge the question that Lee asked in the chat, which was about sharing some alternatives for dealing with people who have done bad things. In general, the literature I've been exposed to, and I invite other speakers to share what they've heard, is that an abolitionist stance on this is that it is prevention. Like, we should give people the resources that they need and design societies in such a way that people have the tools they need to take care of themselves. And when people commit acts of violence, because conflict and violence can be inevitable, we need systems and structures that can respond to it, but also changing the sort of orientation to get back to what John was saying earlier, that we should be focused on the harm itself and its impact on people and addressing the root causes of the harm. Again, so the prevention is the ideal situation, but then addressing the harm itself, and addressing it from all the perspectives, which includes the victim, which the current justice system doesn't prioritize, as well as the person who commits the act of violence or harm, and thinking through that as not labeling that person as someone who is a harm doer, but a person who has committed an act of harm. And so there are systems and alternatives that facilitate community accountability processes. There have been instances of transformative justice circles or restorative justice circles. So there are a lot of alternatives who sort of initiate or facilitate those sort of accountability processes. And there are lots of alternatives being designed and experimented around the country, around the world, to keep thinking through how to envision systems of accountability that address these things outside of the criminal justice system, but also more humanely and more effectively than the criminal justice system. But I'll pause there and pass it back to John for some final thoughts for everyone.
Yeah, I just wanted to make something about the working with and in the criminal justice system. I don't think we can afford to, stand back and effectively desert all those people who are incarcerated. I think we have to engage, but we ought to be careful and always ask ourselves the question: is our engagement legitimizing, or is it providing solidarity for the people in the prison, and trying to intervene in a way which weakens the system rather than strengthens it? Very difficult to do in practice, but I think it's a good principle. I think the question that Lee's brought up, in a sense, what Lee's asking us to do is to focus on the exception rather than the norm. There will always be exceptional cases which will require individual exceptional answers. I think what the critique is about is about the fundamental system. And I think that's where we need to focus. An exercise which I find really useful and in some of sort of community involvement is to have two bits of paper and write whatever the problem people are talking about across the top of both pieces of paper, and on one of them to sort of follow through what they would do if they were to engage with, you know, phone the police or whatever, and see where that leads to, and then on the other to see how they would deal with that same problem but without the institutions of criminal justice being available. And it's amazing how trained we are to think, oh, first thing we do is we phone the police. We outsource the problem to them. And then we get into all sorts of shit because that tends to backfire and cause all sorts of harms. Whereas when we begin to think without those institutions, we're actually quite good at coming up with solutions. And we're quite good at sorting things out ourselves. I think it's just about recapturing that ability to own conflicts. And yes, there are going to be extreme cases, but those extremes can't justify the mass incarceration, the day-to-day violence of the police on the streets. Those are actually far bigger problems than the exceptional so-called violent offender. Anyway, that's probably where I want to finish.
No, I really appreciated this conversation, and from the comments in the chat, it seems like others have really appreciated it too. I really do invite these sort of questions about the exceptional cases, because we do spend a lot of time thinking about, as abolitionists, when we think about alternatives, we spend a lot of time thinking about preventing harms and violence in our communities, creating regular systems that address everyday needs for folks. And there's a lot of evidence to show that having the tools and things that you need to take care of your basic needs would prevent a lot of the issues in society. And we do need to think about when there is some exceptional thing that takes place. And I really appreciate that thought, John, that we are really great at coming up with alternatives, especially when we have to, especially when we are sex workers or undocumented folks or incarcerated or formerly incarcerated or, you know, unhoused. When we have to come up with alternatives, we do. And we need to sort of tap into that as a society and sort of systematize and spread and scale as many different options to folks as possible outside of the criminal justice system. And we need to continue to grapple with the exceptions, because those are the questions that we get asked as abolitionists, even though, especially in case of like a serial rapist, the current system doesn't do anything about serial raping, right? A person who commits multiple rapes is a person who is just in society until they get caught, or until someone manages to convincingly, with lots and lots of evidence to their own detriment, gets them locked up, and that's only for a period of time, right? So that doesn't solve any of the problems with that. It doesn't stop that person from raping from inside. It doesn't stop that person from thinking that rape is okay. It doesn't stop, you know, people who were victimized by that act of violence from experiencing that trauma in their everyday lives. And we are talking about making sure that people have the resources to take care of themselves, and prevent any kind of violence, but also addressing the violence and making sure people have the resources they need to take care of their physical and mental well-being. And we want to build systems and structures and resource those systems and structures effectively so people can have what they need to live thriving lives. So on that note, we're grateful for the speakers who are here, and we want to continue these conversations. So we'll be in touch with the next series of discussions. So thank you all for coming tonight. Thank you so much, Nikki, John, Tyrone. So great to have you all. And thank you all for attending.
Thanks, everyone.